Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you, like all of us, were completely shocked when the news came through earlier this afternoon.
I was, Sally, and I must say it's a very similar feeling to the day Ronnie Mamwepa passed away several years ago, in that Jackson was such a dominant presence and such a larger-than-life character in government and in the communication space, and a very similar energy and charisma to what made Ronnie Mamwepa so special. Similar background too. I mean, activist first, propagandist later, and I think made that transition very easily. I met Jackson, I think the first time was in the late 80s when I was doing work with the UDF and some of the mass democratic movement structures. And I mean, the energy then was palpable, and the leadership and his ability either to interact in a very convincing way one-on-one, or to work with a crowd of 2,000 or 3,000 people. There's a very, very special skill which we've lost. A whole range of facets of his personality which are going to be missed. And I think for government in particular, given that it's the first government leader who's fallen to COVID, a particularly devastating blow, given the role the minister played in communicating around COVID-19 and the pandemic itself.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. But first of all, I want to just focus on the presidency. If you think what's been going on in the presidency in recent times, of course, dealing with this pandemic, which no one could have predicted how it would impact on South Africa, but also the president has lost Kusela Diko to a scandal, and now Jackson Mthembu has died from COVID-19 complications. It must be a very shaken presidency at this time.
I'm sure that's an issue that's going to be dealt with, but I think the key thing now is that Jackson was such a close friend and comrade of the people that you're referring to, that the loss is probably personal in as much as it's anything else. And I think we should give the people involved in the presidency and the people involved in the ministry some space, and the family, to just deal with this loss. You know, I mean, it's phenomenal. It really is devastating to us as outsiders. I can only imagine what the family is feeling and the pain that the president is feeling. I think we can get to that conversation about how government recovers at a later point. Right now, I wouldn't want it to detract from the memory of this huge man and the legacy. It's the legacy he leaves behind that I think we should be looking at. And if we want to look at the future, what can we learn from Jackson? And I think it's integrity, personal integrity, it's commitment, a tremendous sense of discipline, and an ability to tell a story in a way that was convincing. I mean, I haven't met an opposition politician who didn't have time for Jackson Mthembu. I haven't met anybody who had anything really bad to say about him. And I mean, he lived a very robust life. And he was out there all the time. I mean, you could never avoid him, but he managed to pass on, and I hope his legacy is able to be passed on. This commitment to transparency and engagement. I mean, his handling of the press conferences around COVID-19, which was an incredibly difficult situation, it was a masterpiece, I think, in how to sort of win public confidence, how to narrate very basic issues about wearing masks, etc. And I think that's what we should pick up on and try and make sure that legacy carries on.
Yeah, you know, Chris, you're so right. I mean, in South Africa, we do, as Karima Brown said earlier, we have a way of, we're not going to speak ill of the dead, but this is a man who just was universally respected across political lines. This is a man of integrity because he stood up for the truth. And as a communicator, as you say, it was a very difficult task. None of us could have anticipated how this job a year ago, but communicating during a time of COVID, about COVID, is an extraordinarily difficult task because there is so much uncertainty. There is a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And I think that you know, if we look at how our government in general and how Jackson Mthembu has taken that on, what can we learn from the way he did his job in these last months?
Well, as I said, I think the humanity that he displayed was very important. And I think throughout his life, Jackson confronted challenges in a way which we can take note from. I mean, your viewers might remember his drunken driving charges. They might remember the difficulties he had within his family, and then being caught by COVID-19 when he was first diagnosed positive. Every step of the way, he managed to balance the personal with the political, and there was always a human face to what he was saying that I think added to the conviction. I think that in a sense, the pandemic is an incredible communications challenge because of the need for behavioral change. But in a way, the more we can personalize the narrative and the more we can relate it to people around us who are either survivors or have suffered fatally, the more it starts to resonate. And I think that's a particular learning. I also think that, in a sense, Jackson was disarming because of his humanity and his ability to be seen to be joking about issues but making a point very effectively. And I think that's a dimension, which we can also carry through if we're looking at Jackson's legacy, is we need to be complete human beings to communicate effectively. And that means not being a robot, not being a machine. It means showing the weaknesses, owning up to them. And that applies to government as an institution, not just the ministers. Owning up to weaknesses, being transparent and focusing on the solution, and then taking as many people as you can with you, which I think Jackson was very effective at. I mean, some of the initial ministerial press conferences were very, very uncomfortable to watch, but the minute Jackson stepped up and got the microphone wiped down and put on his face mask and reminded people why they shouldn't be smoking, I mean, it took it to another level. And I think that humanity is a very important element of, and that 360-degree approach that we are human beings, we are not robots, and we need to receive and respond to information on the basis of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us on a very difficult evening. That, of course, was a COVID Comms chairperson, Chris Vick, paying tribute to Jackson Mthembu.